Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. On this episode, we're focusing on men and mental health. We all have difficult times where our mental health may be under strain, like grief or bereavement, relationship issues, social anxiety, among other issues. And the stigma around seeking help for mental health is gradually declining, and I think thanks in part to the pandemic. But there's still lots of work to be done, especially when it comes to men and their mental health. Nationally in 2020, 21% of U.S. adults, that would be 52.9 million, experienced a mental health condition. And of those adults, 32% experienced a mental health condition and a substance abuse. The impact depression and anxiety has on global economy can be measured in $1 trillion in lost productivity each year. Many people in Connecticut may not realize that mental health issues can be a serious health condition and can allow up to 12 weeks of income replacement under Connecticut paid leave. If you or a loved one needs treatment for mental health issues, it must include incapacitation and continuing treatment from a healthcare provider. And the cool thing is, you can take the leave all at once in a block of those 12 weeks or intermittently if you have to drive you or a loved one to a mental health care provider, or you can do reduced schedule like if family therapy is needed. So there's flexibility with Connecticut paid leave. I met my first guest, Justin Little, in Orlando at the Podfest Expo. He was a guest speaker, and not only is his voice and its tonality captivating, but he demands your attention because of what he's speaking about. Justin is a podcaster. His podcast is called The Mental Wealth Podcast. It's heard in 45 countries, and I will put a link to it on the podcast notes. He's a mental health expert, national mental health speaker, board certified in psychological first aid, and board director of the Lee Thompson Young Foundation. What a mouthful that is, Justin, but it's really good to see you. Likewise.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully I don't disappoint with, I'm having a little sinuses in my voice, so it's not 100%, but I'm excited to be here with both of you today.
You sound great. And my second guest is Erskine Alexander. He's a licensed mental health therapist at Healing Springs Wellness Center based out of Cheshire, Connecticut, and he is an actor. So let me just say this to you or ask you this. Have we seen you in anything?
Yeah, you have. If you go to Amazon Prime, I was in the movie Me Familiar 2. I was also in the movie Somnium. I was in another movie called Six Tales of Sin, and we just finished filming a movie called The Wizard Tales, the Lost Books. That film is going to come out this year, probably at the middle of 2023. Well, probably towards the summertime of 2023. So they're in the editing phase of that right now. And I was also on the short-lived For Life television series produced by Mr. Curtis 50 Cent Jackson. I was in season 1, season 2, playing one of the prison inmates, and that was pretty fun. All that went down during the pandemic.
Yeah, and you know that Curtis lived in Farmington, in my hometown. Yeah, we used to go to his parties and everything at the radio station. He's a great guy. He's fun to work with, that's for sure.
He really is. He really is. It was such a great experience working with him. And you know, it's one thing to admire his music. It definitely gives you a whole newfound respect for him when you're actually on set with him, because he's really talented with his craft. And it was just a phenomenal experience for me.
Let's just start with you, Justin, and your mental health journey. Did your family talk about mental health or therapy, and how did your journey start?
Yeah, so no, it wasn't, in the typical Black family growing up. And I'm from Virginia. I guess we're considered the South, part of the South, but that doesn't happen. Mental health conversations aren't really a part of the discussion. You're told, pray it away, that typical thing. You grow up in a Christian family, you must not have enough faith in God, things like that. So there's definitely struggles to get your family comfortable. I was the youngest of four boys. And so by the time things that got around to me, like I just was kind of very confused about who I was, what I wanted in life. I ran away a few times, self-harmed. It wasn't until I was like in my teenage years after I had a suicide attempt, where my parents finally had to take me to go see someone. So, I was able to finally get some help and see a psychiatrist, see a therapist. I was going to group therapy, individual therapy. This was about at like 16, maybe 17, still in high school. I was diagnosed with ADHD, diagnosed with clinical depression, and was medicated for that through the rest of my teen years to help me get through school. Was really bullied as a teenager, dealt with a lot of weight issues. So that did help, but it was like pulling teeth just to get to that part. And it's still like something that even when you're going, it's like, oh, you're going to go see that therapy. You're crazy. You got to go see your crazy lady because, it's just not normal to them. They deal with their vices, their mental health in different ways. And so I had to kind of force the issue. And then, once I got help, it was obviously easier. And then I got to a point where I came off the medication, stopped seeing a therapist, and then probably kind of just like self-medicated a lot during my 20s, just through drinking, partying, rebelling. And it wasn't until like my later 20s when I realized that I still needed some help. But then I kind of decided to get some help later down the line.
Was it validation for you when, some of the stories people talk about their suicidal ideations as well and talking about, really deep rooted things? Did that give you some validation that what you were feeling wasn't so crazy? A lot of people were suffering and still are.
Yeah. I would say I think the deepest, darkest thing for a lot of folks, especially who are suicidal, have been suicidal, and the studies we've done with those who have survived suicide, it's typically not themselves they want to kill. It's the pain inside them that they want to kill, right? It's that pain, it's that hurt that they want to get rid of. And in those moments, typically a suicidal person feels misunderstood. They feel all alone. They feel disconnected from the world. They feel like there's no one that can understand them. Just showing up and being there to relate, even if your circumstances don't change, just to remind someone, hey, dude, you're not alone in this feeling. I'm here with you. I felt these things before. I'm with you. That can just be enough to save someone. And so for the podcast, to your question, that was comforting to get text messages from folks, both people who I knew locally, like, people who were friends, family, who were relating, but also people who were strangers, because I grew the audience. And people saying, look, I really needed to hear that. Like, I really appreciated you sharing that. I went through something similar. And I found my voice, and I was speaking things that other people could relate to. And that's what made the podcast popular, because here I was telling my own personal story, my journey, being vulnerable, authentic to myself. But there were other folks who maybe hadn't found their voice yet, but they were listening to me, and they got courage from it. They got, they were comforted to know that they weren't alone. And then for me, on the flip side, to your point, that was comforting to me because I knew I was accomplishing what I set out to do. I knew that the podcast was working, that the goal was to create these conversations, to destigmatize mental health, and to show the world that a Black man, a person that looks like me, can show emotions, can show vulnerability, can talk about mental health in a way that not only is informative and provides resources for the audience, but is also relatable and authentic to who I am. So that's definitely been something that's always kept me going, is seeing that validation from folks who really relate to my message and my purpose.
A study that I found said that Black males have the highest increase in suicide attempts compared to any other race in the group, increasing nearly 80%. Erskine, are you surprised by that, or is that something that you already knew?
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I definitely would say with the pandemic, it just increased, but it's very unfortunate that is taking place amongst men. And I think a lot of that is becoming because of, with social media. When the pandemic hit, a lot of things were, I guess you could say, magnified through social media, which did a lot of triggering for a lot of men, the TV shows and just various things that made men feel less than. So when the pressures of having to maintain your home as a husband, as a father, as a professional, and not being able to properly do that due to what was going on with the pandemic, I could definitely see the increase in that. And it was just very unfortunate. The beautiful thing now is just that people are starting to address their mental health. People are starting to sit down and talk to therapists. Just like Justin was saying, I grew up in the South as well. I grew up in Georgia. he grew up in Virginia. So naturally in the South, our way of coping with mental health was you go to church, you pray it out. Okay, well, yes, you could do that. But at the same token, what happened when the church is closed? For some men, that was their only outlet. That was their only platform to actually be able to address the mental health. Because like Justin said, that wasn't brought up in the household. That wasn't. No one never talked about mental health in my household either. You know what I mean? So when the world came to a complete halt with the pandemic, we were kind of like in a space of like, what do we do? Now we have to address it. We have to just because that outlet of church where you would possibly address the depression or the anxiety or the anger or the things that might have been triggered to you, all that came to a screeching halt. So now you have to go see a therapist. You have to address things mental health wise. For some men, they weren't ready to do that because it was always the stigma. You crazy, man. You crazy. Oh man, you a sucker if you do that. Oh man, I ain't crazy. And so many men who never had the platform to really, really express how they felt resulted in aggressive behaviors, which resulted in some cases, death or imprisonment. So it's good to see us being highlighted now. But to answer your question, yes, I wasn't surprised because it's still, you still have the stigma of people saying that I don't want to go to a therapist because I'm quote unquote crazy. So yes, I can definitely still see the numbers being high because of that. Because of that stigma.
Yeah. And one of the big cases I guess I'd like to talk about is Twitch, Stephen Twitch Boss. He was Ellen DeGeneres' DJ. He seemed to have everything, right? Like he had the nice house, he had the money, he had a beautiful wife, beautiful family, money. He was on TikTok all the time dancing with his wife.
Yeah.
And everything seemed so happy and smiley. And they even had an HGTV show coming out because of the way they redid their house. They were going to start doing things like that. So there was like future plans that would have set him up for more fame and notoriety. And he took a gun and he killed himself in LA. And I was absolutely devastated and shocked by that. And what was the takeaway for that for you?
To answer that clearly, I think what it is, social media. Social media. Everybody looks good on social media. You can edit your pictures, you can edit your videos. Everybody can put up the prettiest picture in the world on social media. That does not mean that you have the mental support outside of social media. When that went down, of course, the phone calls shot through the roof at our office. The television stuff and just in general about why did that happen? What are your thoughts and feelings about it? I don't think he had a proper support to mentally express how he felt. I do think he had to kind of put up the picture, of I'm happy, I'm glowing, I'm happy. And then on top of that, when you look at it with social media, he has a lot of followers. So he was paid to smile and cheese all over Facebook, but that doesn't mean he was happy. Also, the Ellen DeGeneres show ended at one point. So financially, would he have still been in the same place with that decrease in income or the income stopping from that particular show? We just don't know. Did he really, really have the support of his wife? She's beautiful, but was she really supportive? Did he feel supported by his wife? LA is a very aggressive time. Just for me going out there a lot myself and work and all that kind of stuff, it's a tough town. The devastation that's going to be to his wife, the devastation that definitely went to his wife and the two children. You look at the time frame of when that happened around the Christmas holidays.
I know. And that's a really big time for people who get really depressed. Holidays are tough for people,
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And if I could just add something to that briefly, first to your point, Nancy, holidays are a great time for some folks, but there's a lot of people out there who don't have a family, so they dread that time. I know a good friend of mine's, his mother passed and his sister passed, and he always feels so lonely because no one invites him over, and he's home alone, seeing everyone post family photos, matching outfits, and he's like, dude, I get super depressed. And then there's also, too, something called seasonal depression as well, which is a real thing where folks who, when it gets darker earlier, less sunlight, it's a scientific chemical reaction to some folks who really don't do well in the colder weather and those shorter day period, and they thrive more around this time of the year, spring, summer. So that's a real thing to mention. But to the Twitch thing, my mentor, Jay Barnett, he's a licensed therapist. He travels to where he has a tour called the Just Heal Pro Tour, where he goes to schools and meets with Black men. It was just here at Hampton University, 200 Black men coming out from 19 to early 20s talking about mental health. He's an author and he's a therapist. He's appeared on Breakfast Club and I've spoken with him on stages. He has this popular viral video on social media where he says depression does not have a look. He says, I've seen people who seem like they have it all and they take their lives, and people will say, oh my goodness, like you just said, he had it all. He was smiling. He seemed like he had it all, but inside they were empty.
Yeah.
Right. We're seeing celebrities, we're seeing basketball players come out and talk about their mental health and talk about that they have thought about suicide. So it unfortunately in our society is taking successful men, successful Black men to take their own lives for us to say, oh, wow, well, maybe all the money and the cars and the girls don't mean a thing, because if you aren't okay mentally on the inside, if you don't have it together, none of that means anything to you. It's just it's a way for us to mask what we're truly going through. And because of the lack of information and lack of resources for Black men in particular, because you mentioned this to share a brief stat with you. This is something I shared at a speaking engagement recently. The CDC did a study from 2011 to 2020 on Black African Americans' suicide rates in the United States. Between ages of 15 to 24, it was a 9.3% rate. Between ages 25 and 34, it was 11.4%. And then by gender, it was an 11.7 for men to 2.6 in women. So a 3-to-1 ratio for Black men. This is specific to Black men for the study of the 2010s. And this was just the 2020. Who knows where the numbers are now since the pandemic, all the things.
That's right.
George Floyd, the pandemic, all the things we had to go through in the last 3 years. This was just the decade previous to this. And the ratio for Black men to women completed suicide was 3-to-1. It's because as Black men, as Ursine was saying, we've been taught that our value is tied to what we provide. Our value is tied to providing, right? We have all this pressure to provide, to have it figured out for our families. And when we are no longer able to do that, when you're the ball player who's no longer able to play football, right? When you're the DJ who maybe was famous on TV and you're no longer on TV, and maybe your situation changes, how do you still see value in who you are, even if financially you no longer can provide? We have to teach our young Black men that there is value in just your existence. There is value in you just being here. What you can provide is not who you are. It's a part of who you are, but it's not everything. Unfortunately, Black men have been put this pressure on them that they have to provide. And then when they're no longer able to provide or to be able to perform at the same level that they were previously able to, this depression sets in. This feeling of, am I still worthy? And are people going to look at me the same? And unfortunately, a lot of these brothers, they give up. So I feel like we need to do more work in the community to remind these brothers that there's help, there's resources, there's therapy, there's mental health support that exists. And then also reminding them that they are valued just for existing as a Black man in today's society.
Yeah, I always use the terminology that if your back is hurting or if your leg is hurting, you're not going to just keep letting your back and your leg hurt. You have to treat yourself the same way mentally. You know, you go and get that fixed. You know, if you experience the level of anxiety or depression or being frustrated about something and you just can't really come to a proper solution to address it, you should go sit down and talk to someone. Like Justin was saying, that, you know, I have patients right now at Healing Springs that are seeing me because of the frustration of what took place on January the 6th. Their thoughts and feelings about, well, listen, if that was a bunch of Black people that went up on the Capitol, you know, what would happen? It would have been a bloodbath. You know, you have people that can't even verbally express how they feel at their places of employment because they're in corporate America, because it's more whites versus Blacks at that particular office, and they couldn't talk about it. You know, so to see men saying, hey, listen, I'm going to go sit down and talk to somebody. And it's not that you have to always have a problem. You know, sometimes you just need an outlet, and to piggyback on what you were saying, as far as like, you know, when guys go to the barbershop and they talk about these things, you know, it's eerily similar in therapy. You know, I have a gentleman that I work with, several men that I work with, and they just need an outlet. It's just good to talk to another Black man that understands the challenges that I deal with, the stigma that I deal with, the challenges that I deal with being a professional in corporate America. And it's not even that it's a major depression. It could, you know, like I said, it's just anxiety. You know, the George Floyd thing really changed the dynamic in how people move around. as far as men.
Well, I think it's really important to talk about the health disparity in healthcare as well. Historic racism in healthcare has a lot of people in marginalized communities suspicious of healthcare, and rightly so, right? Which includes mental health. And quality healthcare hasn't been made accessible to those communities in the past. But with the pandemic, there's telehealth and there's Zoom calls and like Better Health. And for the LGBTQ communities, they have Pride Health. So do you think telehealth has evened the playing field at all?
It depends on the patient. You know, if I'm talking to an 8-year-old or 9-year-old who has ADHD, it's kind of hard to keep them engaged in a teletherapy session versus seeing them face to face, you know. But then you have others where, listen, they can kick their feet up in the comfort of their home. They're not fighting for parking. They listen, I'm home. And that's their time to talk. Just like I'm just relaxed, I'm comfortable, I'm talking to you guys. So it does have its advantages, you know, because naturally also you have the people that, you know, naturally, whether it's teenagers or adults, you know, the gas prices shot through the roof at one point. So guess what? I can have my therapy session at home and I ain't got to worry about driving, you know, because the gas prices are too high. So it has its advantages by far. I would definitely say more advantages than disadvantages.
Yeah, I think there's still disparities in the community, particularly because there's lack of information, right? There's lack of, we're seeing the resources populate, right? Like there's more and more, there's plenty of, you know, Erksan mentioned, you know, barbershop talk. Well, there's actually a nonprofit called the Confess Project, right? Where you're actually training barbers to be mental health first aiders, to have conversations, right? Because you go into barbershop talk and you typically talk about sports and girls and everything else and music, but how can we train these barbers to speak about mental health? So that's happening, right? I'm affiliated with a group called Black Men Heal. Black Men Heal is based out of Philly, New Jersey, and they offer 8 free therapy sessions to Black men provided by therapists of color anywhere in the country, right? And they go on tours and they go and they speak to Black men and create events for them to come together, right? So work is being, those are just a couple. There's plenty of organizations out there that are helping Black men, right? But how do we get the information to the community so they know what's available, right? Because we can have all the resources in the world, but if they don't know about it, how is it going to help them, right? If you work for a company, you call your HR department today and find out what do they offer as it pertains to mental health. Free services, discounted services, whatever it is, find out. So when it comes to your question, Nancy, how do we get, there is a bunch of things that exist. There's a bunch of BetterHelp.com. I'm sponsored by BetterHelp. You mentioned BetterHelp.
Yeah,
I have
it's a big one.
I love them. They offer great services.
Yeah.
How do we get that information to the community? Because it can't help them if they don't know that it exists. If they've been so caught up, well, I don't want to go into office and see a therapist. I don't want to go. I'd rather be comfortable right here, face to face through my computer screen. I'm a millennial. That's what I'm comfortable with. How do we let them know that, hey, guess what? You can do that. It's available. It isn't expensive. How can we convince them, hey, I can get you a therapist. If you're scared to talk to a white therapist as a Black man because you don't relate to them, that's okay. There's plenty of therapists of color that exist. There's directories that exist where you can search and find a therapist of color specifically that can meet your needs. But a lot of people don't know that.
You know, working for Healing Springs, working for the practice in New York, and in addition to working in the Department of Psychiatry in the Bronx, I am the only African-American male clinician. And if you really, really want to narrow it down, when people come in for services, you know, people are asked now, is he married? Does he have kids? Is he Black? You know, I'm proud to check off all 3 boxes, you know, and it really, really does make a difference. So the diversity is there. It's still low. It's not a lot of us. It definitely puts us in a different space. It's definitely good to see that people are starting to seek it more because, like Justin and I both stated earlier, you know, we grew up in the South. You know, mental health was not something that people addressed. And so when you finally get us to go to therapy, all right, I need to know what he looked like. I need to see his face. Is he a person of color? Is he a man of color or a woman of color? You know, whatever. I don't want to do this, but I'll at least feel 20 times better if I at least know that he's a man of color. Is he married? Does he have kids? You know, does he know the experiences and the challenges? Can he relate to some of the experiences and the challenges that I go through? So yes, it has been a change. I hope it continues to grow. Like Justin said, I do think it needs to get more out into the communities. I'm excited about that. You know, I'm glad that people are starting to, like I said, to notice us. Justin, I'm not trying to sound old when I say this, but it kind of goes back to hip hop, I always kind of use the hip hop term with this. For years, New York was always the dominant force when it came to hip hop, right? It was just New York for years and years and years and years. The South, we were always on the outside looking in. Well, now the tables have turned. Everybody that's hip hop favorite, they're from Atlanta. They're from Atlanta. And that's how it is with mental health now, with the therapists. There was a time frame now when you went to school, everybody said you should be an engineer, you should be a lawyer, you should do anything other than being a social worker. Well, guess what? The tables have turned. Everybody's majored in the field of psychology. There's been a huge increase in that. People are starting to get more jobs with social services, or they're applying for jobs with social services, so it's good to see that part. It's good to see people growing and wanting to get more knowledge about mental health. Like Justin said, I just think that we have to do more as far as like pushing it into the communities.
I'm not saying, and I'm sure Irfan will agree with me, this is not to say that a Black man can't be successful with a therapist that's not of color, right?
Right.
This is not to say that there's therapists out there who aren't of color, who aren't credentialed and qualified, right? And on the flip reverse, for a white man, it's not to say that he could only be successful with a white therapist, he could be successful with a Black therapist. What we're saying is, in the Black community, particularly for Black men, a lot of their mental health comes from their trauma. My father is 60. I've never seen him cry. I asked my mom, I said, Mom, have you ever seen Dad cry? Has Dad ever cried? Well, yeah, I'm sure. I said, no. I said, Mom, have you ever seen Dad cry? They've been married 28 years. Well, he's never cried in front of me, but you know how they was raised. I'm like, that's okay for us to have that, but we have to have that real conversation because there's a generational gap, because generation over generation, he didn't practice mental health. So that's what he passed down to me. So it didn't get to me until later in life. And this is what we're facing as Black men. Any Black man out there that you get something, just give it a try. If you haven't gone to therapy, if you haven't looked at some resources, don't knock it until you try it. Just please give it a try. Get something. Something is better than nothing. And then maybe, just maybe, as a Black community, particularly as Black men, we can start to heal.
It's beautiful. I really love that. And that's why Connecticut paid leave is so important to the marginalized communities. It gives you up to 12 weeks of income replacement for mental health if your healthcare provider says it's a serious health issue with incapacitation and you're still seeing a healthcare provider, which depression and anxiety can be. How important is it to have resources like this? So if you're working a couple of jobs and you take time off, you're not going to get paid. So Connecticut paid leave will give you that income replacement. I think it helps in so many ways. Are these services really so valuable to mental health?
You have people that are afraid to get sick because they're worried about, will I have the necessary income to take care of my home? What happens if I get injured? Can I take care of my home? What happens if my kid gets sick and I have to take care of my kid, and I'm not able to get paid for that. So, I think it's very much needed. I think it'd be very, very beneficial. And I hope that's something that's spreaded. I think that's something that really, really needs to be placed out there for the state of Connecticut.
And you guys too, Nancy, in Connecticut, it's setting a bar for the rest of the states, right? Asking ourselves what at the state level, at the company level, what are we providing or what are we not providing? I read a story the other day of a flight attendant, a trans woman who took her own life, worked for United and had requested leave a few different times for mental health and was denied. And our flight staff, the stories from pilots and flight attendants, people who work in the flight industry and what they're going through mentally and the lack of resources. See, these are conversations that need to be had.
What advice would you give to men who are listening and are resistant to therapy right now?
I think Justin gave the home run answer. Try it. You don't know something until you try it. And the problem is, if you don't try it, you think about the impact that it would have on you in the long run. You think about the impact that it would have on you as a husband, as a spouse, with your children, as a professional. Try it. Mm-hmm. Even Michael Jordan had a coach.
Normalize checking in with each other, providing safe spaces for brothers to open up, to be vulnerable, to share, to not be looked at as soft for doing so, to check in and ask someone, hey, how are you? How are you feeling? And giving them the space to give you the real answer, right? Because typically as humans, we'll say, I'm fine, I'm good. But there's so many layers beneath I'm good or I'm fine, right? Giving them the space to be honest. And then thinking about, to your last question, Nancy, is this generation here, my generation is millennials, right? We have the power to shift the narrative. A lot of our fathers, grandfathers, they might be too far gone, to be honest with you. They might just be too old to really process and understand the power of conversations that we're having right now, right? I was talking to my grandmother the other day. I told her some of the stuff I speak about. So I travel, I get to talk about mental health. She says, oh, is that from the Bible? I'm like, no, it ain't. Now, she's, bless her heart, she's 80-something years old. But no, I don't have to use the Bible. Nothing to take away from anybody's faith. I don't have to use the Bible to have conversations like this at a human level. Yes. That being said, the older generations might be too far gone in their ideology because they're so old school that their thinking is set because it's all they know. Right. But for the new generation, our impressionable youth, they're the future. So imagine if they, just like I did not see my father cry, imagine when I have a son, if I show him that I can cry. Imagine me hugging him, showing him that love, that emotion, that support that maybe I didn't get. I can sit and be upset at the fact that I didn't get it from my father, or I can take that, learn from it, and be a better father to my children, be a better mentor to the next generation, to these young men out there who need to see real life examples of Black men setting the example of vulnerability, taking care of their mental health. Because if they see it, and it becomes the cool thing. They see all these athletes and celebrities talking about their mental health, saying things that we did not see in my generation. That's how we gnaw at the stigma, because we're setting the new normal. We're setting the new standard.
Yeah, it's normalized.
I believe that if we could do that, that's where the work's going to be.
And I think that's the thing that's making it more exciting. And like I said, I'm piggybacking on what Justin said. It's cool now. Go see a therapist. The millennials have really, really opened up the door to say, hey, listen, I need to talk to somebody. I'm going to talk to somebody. I totally get it. My biggest wish, and I'm proud to say that wish is coming true. People are really, really starting to reach out. We just have to continue as a culture, as a community, especially as African Americans, continue to push it.
Well, I hope you both stay well. And I really want to thank you both for this incredible podcast. I really think there's a lot of information that a lot of people need to hear. So thank you both for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy. Truly appreciate you.
And please look at the podcast notes. There'll be information on how you can contact both of my guests. And to find out how you qualify and to apply for benefits, go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.